far as staff are concerned.
Okay.
So don't we go through point by point?
I guess, and as we get to each one of these, we're asking on page 7, consideration to endorsing an ESR addendum for the project. There was some.
Yeah, well, I'll go. Okay, so the first one was the first motion that was passed by both councils and it basically reflected the same, was the preferred option. So both councils selected option number 3 as presented by Stantec. So what staff, what we're recommending, or what I'm recommending, I won't speak for Don, is that the board formally endorse this through motions, and now that we've sent it back and both councils have agreed, just for due process and clarity, it probably makes sense for that motion to happen. In the Lambton Shores motion, we did support that an ESR addendum be undertaken for this, and that's where Lambton Shores is asking the board to give consideration to also passing a motion to endorse that approach.
Sure, I'll make a motion first of all that the joint warrant selects the oral process with flow equalization and value engineering as preferred option to upgrade the Grand Bend area sewage treatment facility.
Any questions on that? Jim?
I just have, can we add that the preferred process include the ESR addendum? Could we add that?
Put it all in one motion?
Yeah.
All in one motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Similar, that's, I guess, similar to our motion that we had there, that the preferred process include the addendum.
Yeah.
So that looks after those 2 items in the one motion.
Good.
Okay? Clear with the movement?
Yes.
Question?
No, did you get a seconder?
Dave second.
Okay.
All in favor of that? That's carried. Thank you.
Okay, so the next
Carry
portion,
on.
next portion of the report talks about some of the next steps. Now we, at Lambton Shores Council, we discussed that probably the best thing to do would be to apply for the scope change to the BCF funding. People, just so that we know, before we get too far along with doing any engineering work or an ESR addendum and spend money, that we make sure that we have our project approved. So council did pass a motion to that effect, and is asking the board to give consideration to it. Now in discussion, Don and I have also thought of some other things that will need to be done. Some of them may be concurrently at the same time as we're waiting for BCF to apply to approve our scope change, and some of them definitely afterwards. But we need to, the board and the councils will need to give consideration of who will be doing that ESR addendum for us. Are we going to open it up to competitive process? Is it something if the project is approved and the ESR addendum is successful, we'll then have to go into a final design stage for this project. So we're before the council will have to give consideration to the engineer that does that. We put in here is whether or not Dillon Consulting continues that because they've done the initial design and have all the work, or whether or not we competitively source that again. If the decision is made to competitively source, we'll have to then review whatever contractual agreements we have with Dillon to make sure that we aren't in breach. And once all that process is cleaned up, we'll actually issue an RFP for consulting services. But the first one we talked about was passing a resolution endorsing that the first thing we should do is apply for a scope change.
Yes, I know I've said this before, but I really want to hear what the board has to say about the issue of scope change, because I think that semantics could have a serious influence on BCF's perception of what's happening. We're not, as I understand it, we're not asking for a scope change. We're asking them to pay for, or help us to pay for the first phase of it instead of the whole project. We're not saying we're changing the scope. We're just saying we want them to narrow down what we're asking them to help us assist us financially.
And that's what we'll be doing. Well, I think what BCF wants to know is that they've kept track of this project. They're well aware that it has changed from our initial idea of building a plant that capable of treating 4659 cubic meters a day. They've sent us 2 letters saying, throughout this process, we know that you've changed. Just send us a letter telling us how. I asked them if there's any format that they have to do this formally, and there isn't one. But really, what they want to know is, how's the project changed? So, it is going to be a phase build, with the initial phase being 2374 capacity. there is a future, consideration of expandability and adding blue water, and, they wanna know certain things of, so that, it's not, maybe scopes, you know, a rose by any other name is still a rose, so.
But-
We're
but-
just sending them information saying this is how the project's changed, and that's what they've asked for.
But we're still hoping to have 4659 when we're done,
And
right?
I'm not debating that, I'm saying that it is ultimately there, and we have to outline to them
Yes.
how it's going to be there through our expandability.
Yes, that's right, so we're not changing the scope.
No.
We still want 4659, and we're all set.
Well, we're using their verbiage, they're calling it scope change, so I'm trying to be consistent with the
Although,
scope
I think we introduced that, and it really isn't, and we have to kind of correct that, we're not changing the scope. And that's really important for us to keep these monies, that we're not changing the scope. And so, but we're saying we only want to focus on the first phase.
I think-
And so it's really important that
I
they
think before we
understand.
get too worked up about it, let's let us draft, between Don and I, we'll draft it.
As
and,
long as you understand it.
Yeah, I fully understand that.
I think what you're saying is that we've changed how we're going to implement the scope.
Yes.
And it's important to be open and transparent with
I'm
them
not saying
what's
that.
happening. So, I think that's,
It's an implementation issue, that's not
Yeah.
changing the scope, it's an implementation issue.
and as long as they're comfortable with that, then there'll
Yeah,
be no
what
problem.
they really wanna see is, you know, what are you doing, what's your construction timeline going to be, and tell us if it's drastically different from what you've originally proposed.
So on page 8, there is the resolution to passing and endorsing the approach. And then there's 4 principles there, I guess, of the 4 things dealing with the engineers. Jim?
I guess we should maybe go through them one at a time.
Okay.
Please.
So let's do the first one, that the approach for, that there be a letter drafted regarding implementation change for the scope of the project.
Just use different words and then.
It's different words in different ways, but it's, we have to communicate with Bill Campbell, and that, I guess, is the.
That's the point, we're asking for the approval of communicate with those.
Yes.
See Don agreeing with that over there, we have to send this letter. Okay, so I'd like a motion on that, so that we're clear. Bill, second by Dave.
Are they going to question, are you gonna name who we're having in there? In that motion? Like, who's going to do it?
Well,
I think
then,
that'd
then
be up to
sure
the-
it's the administering municipality, but, so I'll take the lead on drafting it, but by no means am I gonna do all the work, I think.
We'll get that resolved when we work out the technical.
Oh,
committee.
okay, I'm sorry, jumping the ship.
Okay.
You moved ahead.
I moved ahead one.
All in favor of that? That's carried. Okay,
Now, I just wanna quickly speak, before we have too much of a discussion on this, there is a requirement in our grant, that when you are sourcing work, it does have to follow the people who have signed the agreement, their purchasing policy. So it would mean that we are likely to have to competitively source some of this work. So just something to keep in mind.
so there's these 4, we have to decide on an engineer to complete the addendum. Definitely.
Yes, my sense is that we do have to wait to hear back from BCF before we actually initiate any other process, but I think 2 of these can be done simultaneously. And I'm actually a strong supporter of tendering them both the ESR addendum and the engineering, to see what best we can get. Save ourselves, save our residents as much money as possible, so I would, I suppose, so for discussion, but I would make.
If I
Yes.
may, if that's the approach it's gonna be, that both are gonna be tendered, then I would say that we tender them as one, but 2 phases of work, saying, you know, we'll have a consultant do the ESR addendum, and then have a caveat in their agreement saying that should BCF approve this, then you move on to final design. We may actually lose some economies of scale by tendering it twice. So if a consultant, if a new consultant picks this up, there will be some administrative fee for them to learn the project. And I hate to see us pay that administrative fee twice if we had a different company do the final design. So it'd be my suggestion, and maybe you can weigh in on that, if we're gonna tender all these services, it should be tendered as one big contract.
Doug?
Through the chair, I think there's